Welcome to this journey through one of the most disturbing cases recorded in American history. Before we begin, I invite you to leave in the comments where you're watching from and the exact time you're listening to this narration. We're interested to know which places and what times of day or night these documented accounts reach. In the early autumn of 1908, a peculiar silence descended upon the once bustling Blackthorne estate in northern New York. Located approximately 17 miles from Albany, nestled between the dense Adirondack forests and the winding Hudson River, the mansion had stood for nearly 130 years, a testament to the family's once considerable influence in the region. What authorities discovered on October 9th would become one of the most perplexing mysteries in the state's history, one that the official records would later attempt to obscure. The caretaker, Martin Holloway, aged 63, had not been seen for nearly 2 weeks when a local postal worker noticed an unusual accumulation of newspapers and correspondence at the entrance gate. According to official statements documented by the county sheriff's office, upon approaching the main entrance, the postal worker, Harold Bennett, detected what he described as an indescribable heaviness in the air. The iron gates were unlocked, contrary to the Blackthorne family's notorious obsession with security. More concerning was the distinct absence of any movement or sound from the extensive grounds. What made this case particularly unsettling was not what authorities found, but what they didn't find. The mansion contained no signs of violence, no evidence of theft, and most disturbingly, no trace of the 7 individuals known to have been residing there: Augustus Blackthorne, his wife Eleanor, their adult children Victoria and Montgomery, the caretaker Holloway, the cook Mrs. Abernathy, and Augustus's older brother William. 7 people had seemingly vanished without explanation, leaving behind half-finished meals, still warm fireplaces, and personal belongings arranged as if their owners had merely stepped out momentarily. County records accessed in 1917 reveal that Inspector James Harrington, who led the initial investigation, wrote in his private notes, "In 30 years of service, I have never encountered a scene that has disturbed me more profoundly than the perfect emptiness of the Blackthorne Mansion. It is not the absence of people that unnerves me, but the presence of something I cannot name." The Blackthorne estate had not always carried such ominous associations. Constructed in 1779 by British loyalist Thaddeus Blackthorne, the mansion was originally envisioned as a symbol of old-world aristocracy transplanted to American soil. Architectural records housed in the State Historical Society describe a structure of imposing grandeur: 3 stories of gray stone featuring 27 rooms, including an unusually large library, multiple drawing rooms, and servants' quarters that occupied nearly the entire eastern wing. Interviews conducted with elderly residents of the nearby town of Ravenwood in 1912 paint a picture of a family that kept mostly to themselves. Thaddeus's great-grandson Augustus had inherited the estate in 1885 and, according to local accounts, immediately set about restoring it to its former glory after years of neglect. Town records show that between 1886 and 1892, Augustus employed over 70 workers from as far away as Boston and Philadelphia, many of whom were specialists in obscure architectural techniques or restoration of historical artifacts. What is particularly noteworthy is that not a single worker ever lodged in the mansion itself. Instead, temporary housing was constructed nearly a mile from the main house, despite the considerable inconvenience this arrangement presented. When questioned years later, one former worker, who requested anonymity in the official record, stated, "Mr. Blackthorne made it abundantly clear that no one was to remain in the house after sunset. Not even the foremen were exempt from this rule." Some said it was mere eccentricity, but those who saw the look in his eyes when he issued this directive knew better. By the spring of 1893, the renovations were largely complete, and the Blackthorne family, Augustus, Eleanor, and their then young children, moved permanently from their Manhattan residence to the secluded estate. According to tax records and purchase orders preserved in the county archive, the family maintained minimal contact with the outside world, ordering supplies in bulk on a quarterly basis and communicating primarily through written correspondence. Eleanor Blackthorne, born Eleanor Winthrop of the Boston Winthrops, appears in the historical record as a woman of considerable education and refined tastes. Before her marriage, she had been known in certain circles as a collector of rare books and manuscripts, with a particular interest in ancient medical texts. Her personal correspondence, discovered during the investigation, reveals a woman whose intellectual pursuits had taken an increasingly esoteric turn after moving to the estate. In a letter dated April 1897, she writes to a former academic colleague, "The library here contains volumes that I suspect even the most prestigious universities would not acknowledge in their collections. Augustus tells me they have been in the family for generations, though how they came to be acquired is a matter about which he remains curiously reticent. The children, Victoria and Montgomery, were educated entirely at home." According to household ledgers, a succession of tutors had been employed, though none remained for longer than 6 months. The last tutor, Theodore Walsh, left abruptly in February 1906, breaking his contract without explanation. When located by investigators in 1908, Walsh refused to discuss his employment at the Blackthorne estate beyond stating that some households are not conducive to the proper development of young minds. He subsequently relocated to Oregon, where records indicate he lived in relative isolation until his death in 1931. As for Augustus's brother William, his presence at the estate was not widely known until the investigation. 12 years older than Augustus, and unmarried, William had apparently lived on the 3rd floor of the mansion since 1895, occupying a suite of rooms that, according to the household staff, only Augustus was permitted to enter. Mrs. Abernathy, the cook who had been with the family since before their relocation from Manhattan, told a neighbor in the summer of 1907 that Mr. William takes his meals separately and is seldom seen before sunset. This statement was recorded in the sheriff's preliminary report, but was notably absent from the final documentation. The caretaker, Martin Holloway, represents perhaps the most intriguing figure in the household staff. Having served the Blackthorne family for over 40 years, Holloway was described by those who knew him as unfailingly loyal to Augustus. Town records show that Holloway made weekly trips into Ravenwood for supplies and mail, always arriving precisely at 9 in the morning and departing no later than noon. He was known to deflect questions about his employers with practiced ease, offering polite but essentially meaningless responses. A report filed by Deputy Sheriff Thomas Whelan notes that Holloway's room in the servants' wing contained an unusual collection of items, dozens of small glass vials, labeled with dates but no other identifying information, a ledger written in what appeared to be a personal cipher, and a locked wooden box that, when finally opened by investigators, contained nothing but a single key that did not match any lock found on the premises. The report concludes with the observation, "It is the opinion of this officer that Holloway functioned as considerably more than a mere caretaker to the Blackthorne household." The events leading up to the disappearances in October 1908 can be partially reconstructed from various sources. According to delivery records from Ravenwood's general store, the Blackthorne household had placed an unusually large order in late September, including quantities of preserved food that suggested preparation for an extended period of isolation. The last confirmed contact with any member of the household was on September 26th, when Augustus Blackthorne sent a telegram to his lawyer in New York City. "Tell no one." The lawyer, Jonathan Pierce, of the firm Pierce and Whitmore, later testified that Augustus had, over the preceding months, transferred substantial assets to various accounts and made arrangements for the management of the family's business interests in the event of an extended absence. Pierce claimed that such precautions were not unusual for his client, who had always been methodical in his financial affairs, but admitted that the timing was unfortunate in light of subsequent events. What makes the Blackthorne case particularly unsettling is the physical state in which the mansion was found. The message, preserved in the lawyer's records, contained only 5 words. Proceed as discussed. Inspector Harrington's official report describes entering the main hall to find all in perfect order, not an item out of place, as if the inhabitants had simply dissolved into the air. In the dining room, the table was set for dinner, with food partially consumed on 7 plates. The fireplaces in the main rooms contained still warm embers. Beds were unmade, suggesting they had been recently occupied. Personal items such as watches, jewelry, and wallets remained in their customary places. The only room that showed any sign of disturbance was Augustus Blackthorne's study on the 2nd floor. Here, investigators found an open-wall safe, its contents apparently removed. A desk drawer had been pulled out, its contents, primarily correspondence and financial documents, scattered across the floor. Most notably, a section of the wood-paneled wall behind the desk appeared to have been recently moved, revealing a narrow passage that had not been included in any architectural plans of the house. This passage, according to the measurements recorded in the police report, extended approximately 12 feet into the thickness of the wall before terminating in what appeared to be a solid stone barrier. Despite extensive efforts, investigators were unable to determine whether this barrier concealed a continuation of the passage or merely marked its end. The report notes that tapping on various points of the stone produced sounds suggesting hollow spaces beyond, but no means of access could be identified. In the days following the discovery, a thorough search of the estate grounds was conducted. Tracking dogs were brought in from Albany, but despite ideal conditions for tracking, the ground was damp from recent rain. The animals exhibited what one handler described as extreme reluctance to follow any trail leading away from the immediate vicinity of the house. When forced to proceed, several dogs became agitated to the point of unmanageability, with one animal injuring itself in an apparent attempt to escape its handler. Local newspapers initially covered the disappearances with considerable interest. The Ravenwood Gazette ran a front-page story on October 12th under the headline, "Entire Household Vanishes Without Trace," while the Albany Evening Journal published a more sensationalized account, suggesting connections to other unsolved disappearances in the region. However, within a week, coverage had noticeably diminished, and by the end of October the case had been relegated to brief mentions on inside pages. This sudden shift in media attention did not go unnoticed. In a letter to the editor published in the Ravenwood Gazette on November 3rd, a local resident identified only as a concerned citizen questioned why a mystery of such magnitude has been so quickly forgotten. The letter goes on to suggest that powerful interests might be involved in suppressing further investigation. No response to these allegations was ever published. The official investigation remained active for approximately 6 months, though internal communications from the sheriff's office suggest that after the first month, resources allocated to the case were gradually reduced. The final report, filed on April 17, 1909, concluded that despite exhaustive inquiry, no definitive explanation for the disappearance of the Blackthorne household can be established at this time. The case was classified as unresolved rather than closed, a technical distinction that allowed for the possibility of future investigation while effectively removing it from active consideration. What happened to the 7 people who vanished from the Blackthorne estate? The official record offers no answers, but in the years that followed, various theories emerged. Some speculated that the family had deliberately engineered their own disappearance, perhaps fleeing financial ruin or legal troubles. Others suggested more sinister explanations, ranging from elaborate murder-suicide scenarios to involvement with unspecified foreign elements during a period of increasing international tension. Perhaps most intriguing are the rumors that began to circulate among certain academic circles in the years after the disappearances. These centered on the contents of the Blackthorne Library and Augustus's apparent interest in what one correspondent referred to as pre-Columbian medical practices. Though never substantiated, these rumors gained enough traction that in 1912, a representative from a well-known university reportedly approached Jonathan Pierce with an offer to purchase any books recovered from the estate. Pierce's response is not recorded, but no such transaction ever took place. The Blackthorne estate itself remained unoccupied after the disappearances. As no bodies were ever discovered, the legal declaration of death for the missing family members was delayed until 1916, at which point the property passed to a distant cousin living in England. This individual, Edward Blackthorne, showed no interest in claiming his inheritance and instead arranged for the estate to be maintained by a trust. According to the terms of this arrangement, the mansion was to remain unoccupied but preserved in its existing state until such time as the whereabouts of the rightful owners is definitively established. In the summer of 1917, nearly 9 years after the disappearances, a curious footnote was added to the story when a journal allegedly belonging to Augustus Blackthorne surfaced in the possession of a book dealer in Boston. The journal, covering the period from January to September 1908, contained entries that the dealer described as disturbing and suggestive of a man in the grip of escalating paranoia. Before authorities could authenticate the document, however, the dealer's shop was destroyed in a fire and the journal was presumed lost. Or was it? Records from the State Historical Society indicate that in October 1917, Inspector James Harrington, by then retired from active service, requested access to the sealed files of the Blackthorne case. His request was granted, and he spent several days reviewing the materials before abruptly departing on what colleagues were told was an urgent personal matter. Harrington never returned to his home. His own disappearance was briefly investigated, but with considerably less rigor than the Blackthorne case. The prevailing assumption was that the aging inspector, whose health had reportedly been declining, had chosen to spend his final days elsewhere, though no record of his subsequent whereabouts has ever been established. In March 1918, an unexpected development occurred when Eleanor Blackthorne's sister, Catherine Winthrop, broke her decade-long silence regarding the family. Having previously refused all requests for interviews, Winthrop approached a journalist from the New York Herald with what she described as information that can no longer remain buried. The resulting article, published on March 12th, presented a markedly different picture of the Blackthorne household than had previously been reported. According to Winthrop, her contact with Eleanor had not ceased with the move to the estate, as was widely believed, but had continued through an irregular correspondence that became increasingly concerning in tone. She produced several letters dating from 1897 to 1908, in which Eleanor described strange occurrences within the mansion. In one dated November 1899, Eleanor wrote, "The sounds from the east wing have become more persistent. A insists it is merely the settling of an old house, but I have lived in old houses before, and they do not make sounds like human speech almost, but not quite intelligible." More disturbing were Eleanor's descriptions of her husband's behavior. "Augustus spends hours in the library with those dreadful books," she wrote in a letter from 1904. "When he emerges, he seems somehow altered, not in any way I can precisely name, but as if something essential has been temporarily displaced. Last night I woke to find him standing at the foot of our bed, watching me with an expression I have never seen before and hope never to see again." The most alarming letter, dated just 3 weeks before the disappearances, contained a passage that the newspaper chose not to publish in its entirety. The censored section, preserved in Catherine Winthrop's personal papers and later donated to the State Historical Society, reads, "William's condition has deteriorated beyond A's ability to manage. The The noises from his rooms have caused Mrs. A to threaten departure, and even loyal Holloway appears shaken. Montgomery shows signs of the same affliction, though A refuses to acknowledge it. I fear for Victoria, who has begun to speak of the others she sees moving within the walls. I have made arrangements for her to visit you next month, though I have not informed A of this plan. Some doors, once opened, cannot be closed again. The publication of these excerpts caused a brief revival of interest in the Blackthorne case, but within days a statement was issued by Jonathan Pierce categorically denying the authenticity of the letters and threatening legal action against both Catherine Winthrop and the New York Herald. The newspaper published a retraction on March 15th, and Winthrop herself was not heard from again in any public forum. Intriguingly, court records from April 1918 show that Pierce filed a petition to have the Blackthorne estate declared vacant and its contents transferred to the control of the trust he administered. The petition was granted with unusual speed, and by early May, teams of workers were observed at the estate, removing items in crates marked for storage at a facility in Albany. When questioned by local residents, these workers claimed to be conducting necessary maintenance on the property, though none would elaborate on the nature of this maintenance or the disposition of the removed items. A former employee of the storage facility in Albany, speaking under condition of anonymity to a researcher from the State University, claimed that the crates from the Blackthorne estate contained hundreds of books in languages I didn't recognize, and medical equipment of a highly specialized and unusual nature. Most notably, he mentioned glass containers of various sizes, some containing what appeared to be preserved specimens, though of what exactly I couldn't say. According to this source, in the summer of 1919, all materials from the estate were removed from storage by men who presented documentation signed by a federal authority. It was not until 1920, nearly 12 years after the disappearances, that a possible explanation for these activities emerged. When the facility manager questioned the removal, he was allegedly told that the contents were being transferred to a more appropriate facility in the interest of public safety. No record of any such transfer exists in publicly accessible government archives. The Blackthorne Mansion itself underwent significant changes during this period. Photographs taken by a local amateur historian in 1922 show a structure considerably altered from its original state. The entire east wing appears to have been demolished, and portions of the remaining building show evidence of extensive interior reconstruction. Most notably, the third floor, where William Blackthorne had resided, is entirely absent, the roofline having been lowered to create a two-story structure. Official records offer no explanation for these alterations, though property tax assessments from the period reflect a substantial reduction in the estate's value. A notation in the county clerk's files, dated December 1921, indicates simply that structural modifications were deemed necessary due to irreparable damage from water infiltration. No supporting documentation for this claim is provided, nor is there any record of permits being issued for such extensive work. Local memory offers a different perspective. In interviews conducted in the 1950s as part of a historical society project, elderly residents of Ravenwood recalled rumors of strange activities at the estate during the reconstruction. One account mentions trucks arriving only after sunset, carrying workers who were not from the area. Another describes unusual smells like chemicals or burning that would drift into town on certain nights. Several interviewees independently recalled that during this period, the road leading to the estate was blocked by men who identified themselves as private security, but whose demeanor suggested more official authority. In June of that year, a man identifying himself as Montgomery Blackthorne appeared at a small hospital in western Massachusetts, suffering from what hospital records describe as acute exhaustion and exposure. The attending physician noted that the patient exhibited signs of prolonged malnutrition and psychological distress, as well as unusual scarring on the palms of both hands, forming patterns that appeared deliberately created rather than accidental. During his brief stay at the hospital, the man provided few details about his circumstances, claiming to have been traveling extensively and to have lost all identification documents. Perhaps the most significant development in the Blackthorne mystery occurred in 1923, though its importance would not become apparent until years later. He gave his age as 34, which would have matched the age Montgomery Blackthorne would have been in 1923. However, before authorities could investigate his identity, the man discharged himself against medical advice and disappeared. The incident might have remained a mere curiosity had it not been for a discovery made in 1932. During renovations to the hospital, workers found a small leather-bound journal hidden in a space behind a loose section of baseboard in the room the man had occupied. The journal contained entries spanning from October 1908 to May 1923, written in a meticulous hand that grew increasingly unsteady in later pages. The hospital administrator, recognizing potential connections to the Blackthorne case, forwarded the journal to state authorities. What happened next is documented only in a brief internal memo from the state attorney general's office directing that the journal be secured and withheld from public record pending review by appropriate federal authorities. No further official mention of the document appears in any accessible archive. However, the hospital's night supervisor, who claimed to have read portions of the journal before its confiscation, later shared certain details with her family. Her account, recorded in a family history compiled in the 1960s, describes entries that painted a disturbing picture of captivity and experimentation. According to the second-hand source, the journal's author wrote of being held in rooms without windows, deep beneath the earth, where they sought to perfect the procedure that had already transformed William and was beginning to affect Father as well. The supervisor's account includes mention of entries describing escapes from a facility only to be recaptured, sometimes after months of freedom, and returned for further refinement of the process. The final entries allegedly detailed a successful escape followed by months of concealment in remote areas, before the author, weakened by lack of proper nutrition and ongoing health issues resulting from his captivity, sought medical attention. A report filed by a rural sheriff in Vermont in January 1920 details the discovery of an abandoned campsite containing items of good quality inconsistent with typical vagrant possessions, including a silver pocket watch bearing the initials MB. More significantly, the sheriff noted finding strange symbols carved into several trees surrounding the campsite, reminiscent of medical diagrams, but with significant and disturbing deviations from any known anatomical representation. During the 1920s, several reports emerged from communities along the Adirondack region of individuals exhibiting unusual physical characteristics and disoriented behavior. A doctor in Saratoga Springs documented treating a man in 1925 who displayed anomalous circulatory patterns visible through the skin of the forearms and throat, and who spoke as if multiple voices were competing for dominance within a single vocal apparatus. The man, who gave no name, disappeared from the doctor's waiting room before a thorough examination could be conducted, leaving behind only a note that read, "They alter more than flesh." These scattered incidents might be dismissed as unrelated curiosities were it not for a classified government memorandum that surfaced briefly during a records declassification review in 1976 before being quickly withdrawn from public access. The memorandum, dated August 1927, references ongoing containment efforts related to the Blackthorne Initiative subjects and mentions 5 confirmed sightings within the eastern seaboard region with 2 successful retrievals. The document further notes that Subject M remains at large and is considered high priority due to documented resistance to the advanced stages of the procedure. A handwritten annotation in the margin reads simply, possible. Hereditary immunity factor? While this account cannot be independently verified, certain aspects align with fragmentary evidence from other sources. CWB initial results. What was the procedure referenced in these fragments of evidence, and what was its purpose? The historical record offers only hints and speculation. What seems clear is that sometime before 1908, Augustus Blackthorne became involved in research of a nature sufficiently concerning to eventually warrant government intervention. Whether this research was initially sanctioned by official entities or was a private endeavor, later discovered by authorities, remains unclear. The fate of the other members of the household similarly remains unresolved in any definitive sense. No confirmed sighting of Augustus, Eleanor, Victoria, or the staff members was ever recorded after the disappearances. If the journal discovered in Massachusetts was indeed written by Montgomery Blackthorne, it suggests that at least some members of the family survived whatever transpired in October 1908, though perhaps not in a condition that could be described as fully human. The Blackthorne estate itself continued to exist under the management of the trust until 1943, when it was acquired by the federal government through eminent domain as part of a larger land acquisition for what was publicly described as a watershed management project. Aerial photographs from 1950 show the area completely cleared of structures, with new forest growth already beginning to reclaim the land where the mansion had stood. For decades, the Blackthorne case faded from public consciousness, preserved only in the memories of aging locals and the dusty archives of historical societies. Then, in the winter of 1967, a series of unusual incidents brought renewed attention to the long-forgotten mystery. It began with the discovery of a sealed concrete structure during excavation for a new reservoir approximately 20 miles from the former Blackthorne property. Workers breached what appeared to be a small underground chamber containing shelves of glass containers, most of which were broken in the process of excavation. According to reports filed with the county, these containers held organic materials preserved in solution, though more specific identification was not provided. Within days of the discovery, federal authorities had assumed control of the site, citing concerns about possible chemical contamination. All workers involved in the excavation were reportedly required to sign non-disclosure agreements, and the area was cordoned off for what was described as environmental remediation. No further information about the contents of the underground chamber was ever officially released. However, in 1969, an anonymous letter appeared in several East Coast newspapers, claiming to be from one of the workers present at the excavation. The letter described containers holding human tissue that had been altered in ways that defied explanation, and mentioned documents found at the site that referenced Phase 1 of the Blackthorne protocols. According to this account, the tissues displayed evidence of unprecedented cellular restructuring and vascular systems that appeared to be designed to accommodate substances other than human blood. The authenticity of this letter was neither confirmed nor refuted by any official source, and no further communications from the purported worker ever surfaced. What is documented, however, is a small but significant increase in government funding for a research facility in western New York during the period immediately following the reservoir incident. Budget allocations classified as historical medical research rose by nearly 300% between fiscal years 1968 and 1969, though the specific nature of this research was not detailed in publicly available records. In the early 1970s, a series of Freedom of Information requests filed by a journalist investigating historical medical experiments led to the release of heavily redacted documents that contained scattered references to the Blackthorne materials and continued analysis of viability factors in multi-generational subjects. Attempts to obtain less redacted versions of these documents were unsuccessful. with authorities citing national security concerns as justification for withholding information. The journalist in question, Robert Keller, published a single article on his findings in a medical ethics journal in 1973 before abruptly abandoning the investigation. When contacted by colleagues regarding his decision, Keller reportedly stated that he had received compelling advisement that further pursuit of this particular research avenue would be detrimental to public welfare. He refused to elaborate on the source or nature of this advisement. The most recent chapter in the Blackthorne saga unfolded in the winter of 1989, when a severe storm caused significant flooding in parts of the Adirondack region, including the area where the mansion had once stood. The flooding exposed portions of foundation structures that, according to geological survey maps, should not have existed. Initial examinations by local authorities revealed an extensive network of subterranean chambers extending well beyond the footprint of the original mansion. These chambers appeared to have been deliberately sealed at some point, with concrete barriers blocking numerous passages leading deeper into the earth. Before a thorough investigation could be conducted, federal authorities again intervened, declaring the area hazardous due to potential structural instability. What makes this incident particularly noteworthy is the response it elicited from official channels. Within 24 hours of the discovery, the entire area was cordoned off by personnel described in local news reports as representing multiple federal agencies. Access to the site was completely restricted for nearly 6 months, during which time local residents reported continuous activity, including the operation of heavy machinery and the installation of what appeared to be permanent monitoring equipment. When the area was finally reopened to limited public access in the summer of 1990, all evidence of the exposed chambers had been removed, the land regraded, and native vegetation replanted. A small research station had been established nearby, staffed by individuals identified as environmental scientists, monitoring long-term ecological recovery patterns. This station remained in operation for approximately 5 years before being dismantled, leaving behind only concrete pads and utility connections as evidence of its existence. These rumors, never substantiated by official sources, suggested that materials recovered from the underground chambers had yielded biological anomalies of unprecedented significance and documentary evidence of experimental protocols decades ahead of their time. One account, attributed to an anonymous contractor involved in the cleanup operation, described finding medical journals dating from 1905 through 1908 detailing procedures that combined surgical techniques with chemical compounds derived from plants not previously known to Western science. The journals allegedly contained before and after documentation of subjects who had undergone these procedures, showing physiological changes that would be considered impossible by current medical understanding. Perhaps most disturbing were claims that among the materials recovered were audio recordings made on wax cylinders. Throughout this period, rumors circulated in scientific communities about discoveries made during the government's extensive operations at the site. According to this unverifiable account, the recordings captured what sounded like multiple voices emanating from a single subject and vocalizations that no human anatomy should be capable of producing. The contractor claimed that personnel who listened to these recordings were later required to undergo psychological evaluation and, in some cases, were removed from the project entirely. A budget request from a federal research unit dated October 1989 includes an allocation for specialized audio analysis equipment and linguistic expertise in pre-Columbian dialects, with a notation indicating these resources were required for processing and interpretation of historical recordings recovered from the Adirondack containment site. Similarly, a medical research grant approved in early 1990 references the need for advanced tissue preservation techniques for non-standard biological specimens related to an unnamed historical research initiative with significant implications for current understanding of human physiological adaptability. What, if anything, was discovered beneath the former Blackthorne estate, and what connection it might have to the events of 1908, remains officially unacknowledged. While such accounts must be approached with skepticism, they align with certain cryptic references found in declassified documents from the period. The land itself was designated a restricted watershed area in 1992, effectively preventing any private or academic investigation of the site. Satellite imagery from subsequent years shows the gradual return of the forest, erasing all visible evidence that human habitation ever existed there. The Blackthorne case thus remains one of the most perplexing mysteries in American history, not merely because of the unexplained disappearances, but because of the pattern of official intervention that has consistently followed any potential discovery related to the family or their research. This pattern suggests knowledge or concerns that extend beyond what is reflected in the public record, a shadow narrative running parallel to the official account. Those who have attempted to piece together this shadow narrative point to scattered evidence suggesting that Augustus Blackthorne may have discovered something that fundamentally challenged conventional understanding of human biology, something that raised questions about the very nature of individual identity and the boundaries of the self. Whatever this discovery entailed, it appears to have been deemed too dangerous or too profound to remain in the public domain. In the absence of definitive answers, the Blackthorne mystery has generated numerous theories, ranging from the plausible to the fantastic. Some historians have suggested that Augustus was involved in early unauthorized experiments in areas that would later develop into legitimate fields such as immunology or tissue transplantation. Others have proposed more extreme possibilities, including research into extending human life through means that transgressed accepted ethical and natural boundaries. What can be stated with certainty is that something occurred at the Blackthorne estate that warranted extensive and sustained efforts to contain both information and physical evidence. The pattern of official response, rapid intervention, removal of materials, restriction of access, and subsequent silence has been remarkably consistent across more than 80 years, suggesting a continuity of concern that transcends the normal lifespan of government secrecy. For the residents of Ravenwood and surrounding communities, the Blackthorne name continues to evoke a vague but persistent unease. Local legends about the estate have evolved over generations, with parents warning children to avoid the area even decades after the mansion's demolition. These warnings often include references to sounds that shouldn't be heard and things that look human but aren't quite right, echoing elements of the historical record in distorted but recognizable forms. In 1997, a local historical society attempted to organize an exhibition on the history of prominent families in the region, including the Blackthornes. Researchers reported unusual difficulties in accessing relevant archives, with some materials inexplicably missing or reclassified. The exhibition eventually proceeded with a notably abbreviated section on the Blackthorne family, focusing primarily on their contributions to local industry in the 19th century and making only passing reference to the tragic disappearances of 1908. Perhaps the most tantalizing clue to the true nature of the Blackthorne mystery emerged in the winter of 2002, when renovations to an old building in Albany uncovered a sealed metal box containing documents that appeared to have been hidden intentionally within a wall cavity. The building, which had once housed the law offices of Pierce and Whitmore, had changed hands multiple times over the decades, and no current connection to the original firm remained. The documents, primarily correspondence between Jonathan Pierce and various officials, dated between 1908 and 1920, contained references to containment procedures and secure storage protocols for items removed from the Blackthorne estate. Most significantly, a letter dated March 1919, addressed to Pierce from an individual identified only by the initial H, possibly indicating Inspector Harrington, whose disappearance occurred around this time, contained the following passage: "I have examined the journal as requested and can confirm that it appears genuine." The descriptions therein of the integration process and its effects on human physiology are consistent with the observed condition of WB during my last visit to the facility. What troubles me most is the suggestion that AB had progressed to human trials much earlier than previously believed, possibly as early as 1895. If this is accurate, then we must consider the possibility that some subjects may have been released, knowingly or unknowingly, into the general population before the nature of the progressive effects was fully understood. Of particular concern is AB's reference to latent activation in subsequent generations. The implications of this, should it prove accurate, extend well beyond our current containment parameters. The information it contains may prove essential should we encounter the effects he describes in the wider population. The discovery of these documents prompted a brief flurry of interest in academic circles, but before any comprehensive analysis could be conducted, the materials were confiscated by federal authorities, citing concerns about potentially sensitive historical information related to national security matters. The building owner was compensated for the documents and reportedly advised that further discussion of their contents would be inadvisable. This pattern of discovery, followed by suppression, has characterized nearly every significant development in the Blackthorne case over more than a century. I strongly advise against destroying the journal, despite the risks its existence poses. It suggests an ongoing concern that whatever Augustus Blackthorne was involved with, whatever led to the disappearances and the subsequent containment efforts, remains relevant to present-day authorities. What can we conclude about the fate of the Blackthorne household based on the fragmentary evidence available? While definitive answers remain elusive, certain patterns emerge that suggest possible scenarios. The reference to William Blackthorne's condition and its apparent similarity to what was later observed in Augustus suggests that whatever research was being conducted at the estate may have included self-experimentation. The mention of an integration process with progressive effects indicates changes that occurred over time, rather than immediate transformations. Eleanor's letters to her sister, if authentic, describe behavioral changes in both Augustus and William that align with this interpretation. The description of something essential being temporarily displaced in Augustus and the deterioration of William's condition beyond Augustus's ability to manage suggests a process that altered fundamental aspects of their identity or consciousness. Montgomery's journal, as described by the hospital supervisor who claimed to have read portions of it, refers to a procedure that had transformed William and was beginning to affect Father. This terminology is echoed in the government memorandum, referring to the advanced stages of the procedure and noting Montgomery's documented resistance to these changes. Taken together, these fragments suggest a research program focused on altering human physiology in ways that affected not only physical characteristics, but potentially consciousness itself. The reference to multiple voices competing for dominance within a single vocal apparatus and tissues showing unprecedented cellular restructuring hint at changes that transcended conventional medical understanding. The recurring motif of containment, of the family members themselves, of the research materials, of the physical location, and of information related to all of these, indicates that whatever Augustus Blackthorne discovered or developed was deemed too dangerous to remain accessible. Whether this danger stemmed from the potential for misuse, the unpredictable nature of the effects, or the philosophical implications of the research remains unclear. What is clear is that the Blackthorne case represents more than a simple disappearance or an isolated incident of unethical research. The sustained pattern of official intervention over decades suggests a recognition that the implications of what occurred at the estate extended far beyond the immediate events of 1908. In the absence of access to suppressed materials, We can only speculate about the specific nature of Augustus Blackthorne's work. The references to pre-Columbian medical practices and plants not previously known to Western science suggest that he may have been incorporating indigenous knowledge into his research, possibly combining traditional preparations with more conventional medical techniques. The mention of latent activation in subsequent generations raises particularly troubling possibilities. If the effects of the procedure could manifest in descendants who had never directly undergone it, the potential for widespread and unpredictable consequences would certainly warrant the kind of extensive containment efforts documented in the historical record. This transgenerational aspect may explain why authorities have maintained interest in the case long after all original participants would have died by natural causes. If the effects of Augustus's research could emerge in later generations, monitoring would necessarily continue indefinitely. The most recent verifiable incident connected to the Blackthorne case occurred in the autumn of 2009, when a researcher at a northeastern university claimed to have discovered references to the family in previously uncatalogued documents related to early 20th century medical research. Before the researcher could publish his findings, he reported being approached by individuals identifying themselves as federal agents who advised him that the material he had discovered was subject to classification under national security provisions. The researcher, whose name has been withheld at his request, described being required to surrender all notes and copies of the documents and to sign a non-disclosure agreement regarding both the content of the materials and the interaction with the agents. In a private communication shared with colleagues before ceasing discussion of the matter entirely, the researcher noted, "What disturbed me most was not the heavy-handedness of the approach, but the speed with which it occurred. I had only begun examining the documents 3 days before they arrived. Someone is still watching very carefully for any sign of this information emerging." This incident, if accurately reported, suggests that the veil of secrecy surrounding the Blackthorne case remains firmly in place more than a century after the original events. It indicates an ongoing concern that whatever Augustus Blackthorne discovered or developed continues to be considered sensitive enough to warrant active monitoring and intervention. The land where the Blackthorne estate once stood remains restricted, ostensibly for environmental protection. Attempts by historical societies or academic institutions to conduct archaeological surveys of the area have been consistently denied. Satellite imagery shows nothing but forest, with no visible indication that one of the most perplexing mysteries in American history originated there. Yet the story persists, preserved in fragments of evidence too scattered to be completely suppressed, in local memories passed down through generations, and in the very pattern of secrecy that continues to surround it. The Blackthorne case remains a shadow in the historical record, a narrative whose full dimensions can be glimpsed only through the negative space created by what has been removed from public access. In 1908, 7 people vanished from a mansion in northern New York, leaving behind half-finished meals and still warm fireplaces. In the century that followed, authorities have gone to extraordinary lengths to contain not only physical evidence from the estate, but information about what may have occurred there. The pattern of intervention and suppression itself has become evidence, suggesting that whatever Augustus Blackthorne discovered about the boundaries of human identity was deemed too profound or too dangerous to remain in the public domain. The true legacy of the Blackthorne family may not be found in archived documents or sealed underground chambers, but in the possibility that Augustus's work fundamentally altered the course of certain branches of scientific inquiry in ways that remain unacknowledged. The continued classification of materials related to the case suggests that its implications extend into the present, raising questions about what aspects of human nature are considered too volatile for public understanding. For those who have attempted to unravel the mystery, the most disturbing possibility is not that Augustus Blackthorne discovered something unprecedented, but that he merely rediscovered knowledge that had been deliberately obscured before. The references to pre-Columbian practices and techniques decades ahead of their time suggest not innovation but recovery, access to understanding that existed outside the conventional narrative of scientific progress. Such a possibility would explain the particular quality of unease that has surrounded the case from its inception. It is not merely the fear of dangerous knowledge, but the more profound discomfort that arises from confronting evidence that the boundaries we perceive as fixed between self and other, between individual and collective identity, between human and something else, may be more permeable than our cultural framework allows us to acknowledge. In this light, the most significant aspect of the Blackthorne mystery may be what it suggests about the nature of historical secrecy itself. The case represents not simply the suppression of specific information, but the maintenance of a particular understanding of human possibility, a narrative that excludes certain forms of knowledge or experience that might fundamentally challenge our sense of what it means to be human. Whether any members of the Blackthorne household survived the events of 1908 in a form that could be recognized as fully human remains unknown. The scattered reports of individuals exhibiting unusual physiological characteristics in the decades following the disappearances suggest that some form of continuation occurred, even if profoundly altered, from the original state. The reference in Montgomery's alleged journal to being held deep beneath the earth raises the possibility that some family members were contained rather than destroyed, perhaps becoming subjects of ongoing study. If so, the location and nature of this containment remains one of the most closely guarded aspects of the case. What can be stated with reasonable certainty is that something occurred at the Blackthorne estate that was deemed significant enough to warrant more than a century of active suppression. Whatever Augustus discovered or developed in his isolated mansion, its implications were, and apparently remain, profound enough to justify extraordinary measures to keep it from public awareness. For those interested in the boundaries of human knowledge and the forces that shape our understanding of what is possible, the Blackthorne case represents a tantalizing glimpse of paths not taken, or perhaps paths deliberately obscured. It suggests that beneath the official narrative of scientific and medical progress lies another history, one of discoveries too disruptive to be integrated into our collective understanding of what it means to be human. As we approach the 117th anniversary of the disappearances, the Blackthorne mystery serves as a reminder that some questions, once asked, cannot be unasked, and that some answers, once found, may be deemed too profound to remain within reach. The true horror of the Blackthorne legacy may lie not in what happened to 7 people on an October night in 1908, but in what their fate reveals about the boundaries of acceptable knowledge and the lengths to which authorities will go to maintain those boundaries. In the end, the most disturbing aspect of the Blackthorne case may be the possibility that its central mystery has indeed been solved, not by independent researchers or historians, but by those who have systematically removed evidence from public access. If so, the answer must be profound indeed to warrant such sustained efforts at containment. For the rest of us, the Blackthorne estate remains a shadow in the historical record, a reminder that not all aspects of human experience are permitted to enter our collective understanding of the world. In that shadow lies perhaps the most fundamental horror of all, the possibility that our conception of human nature itself is not a reflection of inherent truth, but a carefully maintained construct designed to exclude possibilities too disruptive to contemplate. The mansion is gone, its stones and timbers long since returned to the earth. The family has vanished, their fate known only to those with access to information deemed too sensitive for public consumption. But the questions they raise remain, echoing through the gaps in the historical record like voices from behind a wall, almost, but not quite, intelligible.